So let's just say this is podcast number 1.
Is it
Take
recording?
1.
Is it recording? How is it actually? We got all
Yeah.
of that. Oh my
What's
Lancet.
good is I can edit that part out.
No, I think you should keep it. I
You
think that keeps
think?
it fun. That keeps
Yeah.
it fun and
Yeah.
silly for everybody.
Yeah.
No, I'm the weirdo that has the headphones on.
Yeah.
I
This would be
guess.
like we really don't know what we're doing.
We have no idea what's going on. We don't even know if it's recording, honestly. Like,
Yeah, it is. I totally know that. I wanted to just bring good people like Kai and my nephew, who've been one of what I'd call one of my 1,000 threads of light. I think, what have we learned from each other, Kai? What else should we talk through?
I don't know. This is your show.
I know
This is your show. This is your idea.
So Kai and I have been talking a lot, right? Kai, tell us a little bit about you. Like, how do you and I connect? Let's talk through that.
So my name's Kai.
Yeah.
I'm 25. I grew up in Preston, Idaho, which is an hour south of where you grew up, or a little bit more than an hour south, I guess.
His mom is my sister.
Yep.
She's my big sister.
Yeah, by like 2 years, 3 years.
Yes, just a couple years.
I am the middle child. 5 boys. I'm number 3.
And where are you living now?
I live in St. George, Utah now. I go to nursing school there. That's why I moved there. Before that, I was living in Big Sky, Montana. Before that, I was living in Logan, Utah. And before that, I was living in Waterford, Maine. And before that, I was living in Big Sky again. And before that, I was basically homeless in like Oregon and California, being a wildland firefighter.
Fought fires. What else have you done in life?
I fought fires. I worked at a ski resort. I drove snowcats and stuff at a ski resort, and did a bunch of restaurant stuff at a ski resort. All of my restaurant and snowcat lore comes from the ski resort in Montana. I worked in Maine at a summer camp where I was they called me the trip hippie. So I was just in charge of taking kids on trips. I'd be gone anywhere between like overnight to like 3 or 4 days. I think 4 days is the most we ever went for. We went on like a 40-mile backpacking trip, something like that. We were like out in the wilderness. We were like on the Appalachian Trail for a few days. That was a really sweet trip. And that was like, it was a boys camp, different age groups, obviously went on different trips. You're not going to take, we had as young as like 6 or 7, I think was the youngest kids that I took out. The oldest were, I think, 15. And so the 15-year-olds are the lucky ones that got to go to the backpacking trip and be completely miserable with me for a few days. And then the 8-year-olds would go like overnight. Yeah, so I would do multiple a week. That's how it worked out. It was a 7-week camp. Some boys stayed the full 7 weeks. Some boys were only there for 4 weeks. Some boys were there for 3 weeks, and some boys were there for 2 weeks. Generally, the younger ones were there for a shorter amount of time. And then the ones that were older, like 14, 15, 16, were there for the full 7 weeks.
Huh.
And I would go in any given week, I would go on, I would say 2 trips.
Right.
It was kind of how it worked out is I would do during the week is when all of my trips happened. Sunday was kind of my prep day, I guess you could say.
Sure.
There were no trips that happened on Sunday ever, but sometimes we'd leave like Monday morning or Monday afternoon, and then I'd be gone for a few days and get back and maybe have a day to reset and get ready for the next trip. But I was constantly gone. And where I was at in Waterford, Maine is very western Maine. Can't even think. You're not on the coast.
Sure.
You're almost in New Hampshire at that point. So I spent a lot of time in the White Mountains. Is the mountain range there that's like really big. There's like the Presidential Mountain Range. It's also part of that. So like Mount Washington, which is the highest point in the Northeast, which is a whopping 6,200 feet. That was one of the mountains that we hiked, which was a big deal for all the boys there. And some tried to tell me how they could feel the air was thinner there and some bull crap. And I'm like, guys, no. We're not above 10,000 feet.
Come out, Idaho.
Yeah, I was like, I grew up at this altitude. That was my favorite thing to say. We'd be on top of some mountain, be like, 4,000 footers were a big deal in Maine and New Hampshire. Those Appalachian mountains, those are considered tall mountains. You're above tree line somehow. How that makes sense, but it does there. And I would tell everybody that, this is the altitude of my hometown. Welcome to Idaho in a way. I think it would wig all of them out a little bit. Most of them didn't know where Idaho was. They all thought I was from Iowa, I think, for the majority of the time, because they'd heard of that more than they'd heard of Idaho.
Right.
Nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but I think especially the younger ones, there's no shot they could tell me where Idaho was on the U.S. So.
Yeah. So you have been everywhere. What did you call yourself? The happy hippie?
Sure. I don't know. I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I feel like I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say too much. I enjoyed it like the right amount. I honestly would have never come back. I met a guy while I was in Big Sky that had done the season jobs for years and years and years, and was like in his 50s probably. And he was telling like the story of his life basically. And it was a cool story. Like, don't get
Sure.
me wrong. Like he was down in Guatemala for a while and like had lived in Belize for a bit and like ran a bar or something down there. I don't super
But
remember.
he was always going from the next
That he was always going from the
nice
next gig to
gig.
the next gig and like never willing to invest in real time in like a single place or a single person.
Sure.
And I just looked down and I was like, dude, you're a 50-year-old with some super cool stories. You're kind of just alone with your nicotine addiction.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily want that. And so it kind of, I guess, was a little bit of a wake up call for me. I was 22 when I talked to that guy. And it, if I'm so real, it took me another year before I decided I wanted to like build something else for my future a little bit. And that being said, I haven't stayed in the same place for longer than a year since. Moving to St. George, I've been there for 4 months now, and I'll be there for realistically 3 years by the time I get done with nursing school. And then I'll probably work at the hospital there in St. George for a year to kind of get my stuff together.
And you were telling me, I mean, just why nursing? Like, why go into that?
So when I first started going to school, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I was like, I guess I'll go to school. Even when I was 18, I had no idea what I wanted to do. That's why I went on a mission, is because I didn't want to go to school because it was like things were too real and I just didn't want to figure it out. And Mama Joy wanted me to go to BYUI really bad, and I wanted to go to Utah State. And so instead of like actually like addressing that disagreement, I just was like, let's just go on a mission because you're not going to argue with that.
Okay, now for people that don't know a mission, like what's that?
Oh, so that's where in the LDS Church, you
The
go,
Church of Jesus Christ.
the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you go and preach the gospel and spread the good word and teach people about Jesus for 2 years in a location that you don't get to decide. You just say, I'm willing to go. I got called to Guatemala. I was in the Guatemala City East mission, which I guess for anybody who's really like wanting to look up things about Guatemala, I was in Guatemala City, which is kind of like the southwestern corner of the country. Then my mission ran all the way along like the border with Honduras over to the East Coast.
Nice.
And so I had areas or places where I was assigned to serve or assigned to be a missionary. I was in an area called Ibala. That's where I started. It was like in a department called Chiquimula, it was very close to the border with Honduras, not in the city by any means. It was a lot further east, but you weren't on the coast either. I had a time where I was like right on the coast. I had a time where I was in the banana fields between that first area I mentioned in the coast. I spent about a year in the capital, saw some really gnarly stuff. That's not part of the mission, I wouldn't say. But I learned a lot of different things. It made me love Spanish. It made me love Latin culture. And it made me really, really appreciate that I did not grow up outside of the US or the little like bubble that I grew up in southeastern Idaho. It made me, I guess, view my life as like this golden ticket. In a lot of ways, it made me really want to do good with that because I could see like how much, I guess, privilege I was given, like right from the get-go, like just being born in a certain place. Because all of a sudden, during those 2 years, I was surrounded by people that either didn't have enough to eat or didn't know how to read or bowl or had other different problems. There's a lot of really heavy, violent gang activity in Guatemala. I remember there was a time I was looking for certain people that had been baptized in the church. And so I was like looking for them, trying to like reconnect with them, see where they were at in their life. They were in their 20s from what I remember, because we had a little form that said like, hey, this person's baptized. This is how old they are, kind of where they live, because there's not even like real addresses or anything in Guatemala. There's not any kind of like postal service there. And I remember trying to find these people, talking to other people that were members about like, hey, like what happened to this person? And they were like, oh, they killed them. And they told me that like so deadpan, like I almost started laughing. I was like, what do you mean they killed them? Or like they were dead. That was what they said. They were dead. And I was like, what do you mean they're dead? Like I looked at it and I was like, it says they're 25. Like, what do you mean they're dead? And they're like, they killed them. And I was like, who killed them? And they're like, they got involved with some kind of gang extortion. I think it was phone extortion. And they're like, yeah, they killed them. And they found them cut into pieces in this house on the street. And I was like, holy crap. I was 18 when I found that out. That was like one of the first times. That was probably one of my more dangerous areas that I was ever in.
You'd probably never ever something that dark in your head.
No. And it was just like, it was like so real and just like hit me in the face so hard. I remember in that same area, this was an area just outside the capital of Guatemala. The name of the area was Nezacorpia. I was there for 3 months is all. And so in those 3 months, I mean, I had that experience with finding out that this person had been murdered and cut into pieces. And then I had another one, like we were going through, you have like a list of like all people that have been taught in the area, like I don't know what it's called in English.
It's okay,
Like
say it in Spanish.
the
You're fine.
area, the carpeta de area is what we called it. But it was just like it was a binder that was full of all these forms, like explaining all these people that have been taught in that area. And one of them is just like how it ended. I don't know really why they left this form in there. I guess because so you could remember this person, but how it ended was like they killed him.
Huh.
And it was like somebody that they'd been teaching him for, I don't remember how long. And it was a guy that we started our missions together. When I was in Anticorpia, I'd been in Guatemala for just over 8 months, is when I got assigned to that area. This was my friend that we started our missions at the same time, but he went there when we had about a month and a half and all.
Sure.
It was all in Guatemala. So like right after the MTC, when we like went through our training or whatever, where they tried to give us a crash course of Spanish. And he was the person that had taught them. And so he was like in his training, like just learning Spanish and stuff. He's this kid from Salt Lake. And it was just like one day they like went to go teach him and there's like, oh yeah, like he died.
Huh.
So there was a lot of stuff like that. I had another area in the capital where they found a torso of this lady in the river, right where I was at, and nothing else. They didn't ever find anything else.
New experiences for sure.
Absolutely. So I guess my biggest takeaway, I'm sorry I like went like down as a rabbit hole of just like dark, horrible things. My biggest takeaways from my mission, which honestly, like I didn't want to stay, and then I ended up staying the full time, and I'm really, really glad that I did. Probably the best thing I've ever done with my life.
You're telling me though, was it hard?
So hard. The hardest thing I've ever done.
In what way?
Mentally, I think is probably the biggest, definitely the biggest one. Like learning Spanish was a complete trip. And I got to a point where I felt like I was pretty good at it. I really, really enjoyed it again. But I remember like first learning it, like I was just having migraines by the end of the day because I would like the whole day it was me just trying to understand what was going on around me.
I know you'd mentioned, I mean, we're kind of catching up because we've been talking all day and thought maybe we should put a microphone in front of us while we do this so we capture it. But where you just said there was a lot of anxiety for you, right?
Yes.
Where you had to kind of just work through, am I good enough?
Yeah.
Talk to that a little bit.
So I feel like when that really got the worst is when I'd been there for about 4.5 months. I was in the first area that I said before, like Ipala, like very close to like the Honduras border, very poor area. And that was, I think, that was one of the first like wake up calls, not necessarily to the danger of living in Guatemala, but just like how poor people can live and still survive. And it kind of made me realize that, like I had this like golden ticket, but then it also, I was so hard on myself. Like I didn't feel like I was learning the language fast enough. And I didn't feel like I knew my stuff about like gospel things enough. And I didn't feel like I knew scriptures enough. I didn't feel like I was really good enough in any way. I wouldn't say that this was something that I struggled with while I was on my mission, but before my mission and also after my mission, there was a real struggle with pornography for a while in my life. And so because of that, because that's not a good thing and so heavily discouraged in the church for good reasons, I felt like because I had struggles with that I wasn't good enough. Like it was all of those things that I just like invented in my head that I wasn't good enough. And so I went and I talked to my mission president, who was the one adult that's in charge of like 150 teenagers going around trying to preach the gospel. I went and told him all that. I was like, I'm not good enough. I need to go home, basically. And I gave him the shorter version. I wasn't as upfront and comfortable talking about certain things, especially, I guess, like the before the mission issues of pornography. But I was like, I can't be here. Like, I don't believe in this, basically. And he looked at me. He's my dad's first cousin, which is very, very abnormal in a mission president relationship, I would say. But he looked at me and he was like, I know your family. I know you're capable of this. We didn't know each other before I went to Guatemala. But he was like, I know your family. I know you're capable of this. I know that your parents would eat me alive if I sent you home. So I'm not going to do that. So here's what you're going to do. And he told me that I needed to read the Book of Mormon because that was my big thing. I was like, I'm not good enough because I never actually read this. And I guess the Book of Mormon, to give this context to anyone that is not familiar, it would be, it's like in a supplementary book to the Bible that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints uses. Different account from a different people. It's something that I feel like is definitely almost stressed, I feel like a little bit more at times in the Bible. That's how I felt about it growing up. I felt more of a push to read that than to read the Bible at times. Not that the Bible wasn't important, but I think the biggest thing that it came down to is it's a lot easier to read the Book of Mormon because it's about half the length of the Bible than it is to read the full Bible. Not that there isn't good things that can be taken from the Bible. That's not what that means. The Book of Mormon is like a very big part of faith within the church. And I hadn't read the whole thing at that point.
This is kind of what you're saying. This is your journey of you starting to figure out how to look upward, to look to something, to God, right?
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
just kind of figure out what you valued there.
Yeah.
So look at where you are today. Talk about today. Where are you at today and all this?
I don't go to church.
Yeah, talk to that.
When I got home, I think in a lot of ways I was kind of burnt out with church. I was like an assistant and everything on my mission. I was like a top dog, I guess, in the mission. I was there for a whopping 5 weeks. I did not want to be in the office at all. I remember when I was calling Steve, but my mission president called me and was like, hey, we need you to come to the office. I went there in kind of a like emergency situation. Like there was a situation with one of the people that was in the office of like, hey, you can't be in the office anymore. We're going to send you somewhere else. And so they brought me in kind of like out of the blue. And I remember he called me and I said, no, I don't even know how many times.
Sure.
And he was like, tough crap, like get on a bus. You're going to come to the Capitol. You're going to come hang out with me and it's going to be fine. And it was in a lot of ways. I was there for a whole 5 weeks. And then I basically told Steve that I was done. I was like, dude, like send me anywhere else. Like I didn't want to necessarily go home. I had about 3 months left before I finished my 2 years. But I was like,
does that kind of get back to the anxiety of what you said earlier?
No, by then I was really comfortable.
Mm.
I was really, really comfortable. I feel like in who I was and what I was doing. And I think part of it was like, I was really comfortable with who I was, and like a big part of who I am is I like to have fun and enjoy myself. And I did that in a lot of ways while I was in the office. I feel like I could have done a lot of really good things while I was there. But for whatever reason, I got it in my head. So I just got to this point where I was like, Steve, I'm done. Like, send me anywhere else. And so I made it a whole 5 weeks in the office. He sent me out to the banana fields, which is where I finished my mission. And I had a lot of really, really good experiences there. I had a lot of fun while I was there.
So that's kind of Kai's background, which is
Yes,
that
there's
actually,
a lot.
there, I think you actually have to understand where you've been to understand where you're going. Right.
Yeah.
I think so. We've kind of heard where you've been. But where are you going?
Well, I don't know. I'm in nursing school. I love critical care. I love emergency situations. I guess I thrive on that a little bit. It's like really high stress, high energy, high consequence. And maybe I'm a psycho because I enjoy that stuff, but I do. And I feel like I can do well in that, which is not something, it's not for everybody by any means. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. That's, I guess, my happy place with the work. And it makes me feel like I'm doing something good and putting good out into the world. I feel like all of that, like my drive to want to do that, started a little bit on the mission, especially in that last area. Whereas, like I said, I was out there having fun. I had a guy that I took care of, a guy that I taught that wanted to commit suicide at one point. And we talked him out of it. And I feel like that was kind of a turning point for me. I was 20 years old doing stuff like that. And it was surreal in that moment. And then another moment, I guess later, this was while I was in Montana the first time. I had a friend, this was right after I got my EMT certification, which I initially did my EMT and initially got as medical stuff at all because I wanted to use it for wildland fire. And I wanted to use it to ski patrol. And I didn't end up doing either of those things again. But that was my initial, like, why I wanted to do that. And I'd always had this mental block with medical things because I wasn't sure that I could handle like the level of gross that's associated with it. I think my parents had kind of like said stuff or something at some point when I was in high school, and I'd taken it way too literally and taken it to heart. So I had this moment where I was with my friends. My friends partied a lot in Montana. Round one, I didn't party with them, I guess, but I was there at the parties.
Sure.
And so I was a designated driver with this 19-year-old that was beyond wasted. And I drove him home. I remember we drove home in a snowstorm. I was supposed to drive him back to his apartment there in Big Sky. I also had an apartment in Big Sky. I wasn't on the resort. He was like further up closer to the resort. I was like kind of more in the town center there. Then the snow plows weren't really out yet because it was kind of the middle of the night. And so I was like, okay, like, it's not going to work. I'm going to take you back to my place. And when we started driving, I knew he was really drunk. I knew like everyone else like at the party was like, hey, like you need to actually watch him. Like you need to make sure he's okay. And so I was like, okay, like I kind of knew that going into it. I'd been around, alcohol and booze and partying, I would say a fair amount up to this point, but not to this extreme. I remember we got back to my apartment and I was like, you'll just sleep on my floor. It'll be fine, whatever. And I like turned off my car and I was like, all right, dude, like we got to get out. And like he's nothing, like not responsive to me at all. And I mean, this was me like just barely finished my EMT stuff, and like they were like, I mean, I was just like trying to see like if he would respond to anything. I finally got to a point like, he would kind of half walk with me if I kind of half carried him. And so I half carried him, half walked with him back to my apartment. I think by the end I was legit just like dragging him into my apartment because I was like, okay, like we're just gonna get him laid down. We're gonna see what we can get figured out here. I had a roommate at the time, this 18-year-old kid from New Jersey. I walked through the door and I was like, hey, like this is my friend and he's really messed up and he's gonna sleep here tonight because I can't get him anywhere else. We were there for maybe like 10 minutes or so before my friend that was really, really messed up started to throw up, like while he was completely unconscious. But he started to throw up. I remember it got everywhere. Like it was so bad. And there was a point where I was holding him up kind of like with my arms and had a garbage bag in front of his face. And he was like throwing up into the garbage bag. And I remember like in that moment, I was like, I can do this. Like I'm actually okay. And that kind of, it got me over that block that I'd had a little bit with medical things where I was just like, yeah, I can't do that. So yeah, then.
So that's kind of where you feel like all of your talents have blended toward bringing into nursing and assisting and helping people.
Yes, in a lot of ways. And then I was able to shadow Uncle Lance, do like some surgeries and stuff with him. I did a couple different days of surgery with him, and that kind of, I guess, got me over like the blood side of the gross. I knew I could deal with like people's insides being everywhere, but like the blood side, I know that it's a way that I can put good out into the world. Because I think that, I had that moment in Guatemala when I felt like I was doing a really, really good thing that wasn't necessarily associated with like missionary things. It was kind of more unique in getting my friend to not want to commit suicide. And it was kind of like in that same, I guess, field. I feel like with nursing, I'm able to help people in a lot of different capacities. Because working in the ER, where I work in the ER and the ICU now while I'm going to school, not as a nurse, but like as a tech, but I get to help out the nurses with all sorts of different things. And so I see people that are really sick. I see people who are suicidal. I see people who aren't very sick that really don't need to be there. Like, you see all kinds, especially in the ER. I just feel like with nursing, it makes it so I can do good, which is like such an important thing to me because I feel like I was given this golden ticket and life was really, really easy for me initially.
Right.
And yeah, it just like it gives me purpose. It makes me feel like I'm doing good things. More so than anything else that I've tried, which has been a lot of stuff.
Well, and you're telling me, I think you should kind of gone on your journey. Like this, just making real authentic connections. Talk to that a little bit. He's got a cute little girlfriend, I think, right now.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't even know where to start with that. I love people. That is really what it comes down to, I think. And I love getting to know people and kind of hearing their stories. I love it when it's like a different story than mine.
Yeah.
I think that maybe I've really struggled with living in Utah and I guess like the culture that exists there a little bit. I think part of that or a lot of that is a mental block for one. And then for two, I just feel like I'm hearing the same story constantly because everyone has such a similar upbringing and growing up story, which isn't a bad thing. Like I am so grateful for the way that I was raised and the way that I grew up. But I definitely have felt more drawn to other places just because it's like, different stories and people that are still really, really good people, even though they were raised in a different way than I was. But yeah, I don't know. I love connecting with people, I guess, on like that social level or like emotional level.
I mean, I wish we could have recorded our conversation from earlier where we were. Anyhow, I think the big thing, you're talking your values a little bit and just some of what you valued and what you appreciated that others valued as well.
You mentioned Michelle, the girl that I'm dating right now. And we haven't been dating a super long time, but I super enjoy Michelle because we're in nursing school together. And so I feel like she has a very strong drive to do good and to help people. And I guess this is one thing that I really like about nursing in general is that you can do such a wide variety of things. Because for her, what she's really passionate about is It's more the inpatient side than what I do. So I am very much in like the critical care and emergency, and she is a lot more drawn to like inpatient, specifically like cancer patients. Like she loves to hear people's stories and feel like they are heard and
Yeah.
seen and cared about. It's something that I really admire about her is that she tries really hard to make those people feel heard and be seen
Do
and be
you
taken
know,
care of. Yeah, I feel like it's really easy to be kind of jaded after a while working.
like
It's
over here,
really
that's
easy
right,
to see people as like diagnoses more than an
people,
actual person. And I'll be really real. I think that especially in the environments that I work in, people end up more that way. Like it's like we have people come into the ED and it's like, oh, it's like they're a chest painer or they're trauma or you don't really see them. Or it's like I get, in the ER, we don't have a huge ER. It's about a 30-bed ER. And we still in a day we'll see probably, close to 200 people a day.
well,
And so we always call it like turn and burn. Like
sure,
you get people in, you do tests on them, you do whatever they need. Sometimes they just need a little bit of fluid and you can send them on their
sure,
way. Or, you do tests and it's like, hey, they've actually got, something wrong with their kidneys or liver or whatever. And we might have to like admit them or do things
sure.
like that. But the bottom line is they should never be in the ER. The goal in the ER is to never have somebody there for longer than about 4 hours. The ICU where I work is a little bit different because obviously people come there when they're critically ill. And most of the patients there are not coherent. They're not with it. They're not going to talk to you, which is a way different situation from like I worked on a medical unit in Logan, Utah for about a year and is way different, seeing patients who are like, literally on death's door, like they've got a
Sure.
ventilator and a tube running down their throat and they're on medication that brings their blood pressure up and they're sedated. Seeing people like that in the ICU now is like so different than what I saw in the medical unit,
Sure.
where I feel like it's a lot easier to connect with people because you can actually talk to them is the
Right.
biggest thing, and you get to be there for them a little bit more. I don't regret where I'm at, but Michelle is definitely a lot more. She likes getting to show that she cares about them. I think that's the biggest thing that
Sure.
it comes down to for her. And that's not necessarily what she's told me. That's just more, I guess, like what I've observed from her is that it's important to her to, make people feel seen and, make sure that they're taken care of and make sure that they're taken care of well. Like she's not gonna, I know this is going to sound horrible, but this happens a lot more than it should. But people in the ER especially will bring up patients that like, hey, they're going to get admitted to this floor.
Sure.
And they'll get up there and they'll be covered in their own feces or they'll be covered in urine just because they haven't been getting checked on like they should have been, and they were incontinent. And then they get up to the floor and the people on the floor get frustrated at the ER because, that shouldn't
Sure.
happen.
Sure.
That is something that should not happen. And then they're the ones that are kind of stuck taking care of them and cleaning them up. And Michelle likes to talk a lot of crap on the ER. And I think it's funny because she knows I work there. Like she sees me go to work there all the time. So she likes to talk crap on it, but she's also, she gets frustrated when people don't get the care that they deserve because she makes sure that they do.
What are you drawn to in terms of when I say this thread of light, Ida?
It makes me think of, honestly, a lot of the guys that I met when I was fighting fire. I was only out there for like 3 months, but I have two friends that I've stayed like pretty close with since. And it's not like, one of them I haven't seen in a year and a half. The other one, he came up to Montana with me both times that I was up there. And so I haven't seen him in about 7 or 8 months at this point because he left Montana to go join the military. He's wants to be a Green Beret. But I guess just like people like that where they are willing to either sacrifice their time or like a certain portion of their life or just work really hard to make something good happen.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the guys that I worked with out in Wild on Fire fit that bill, and they are the roughest people you'll ever meet. Like, I don't know, like it's just, yeah, like this, the language that they use. I always thought it was a little bit ironic. Like a lot of them smoked. I thought that was always funny to be, meet these firefighters out in the woods. Yeah, be fighting fires and you're smoking. We already were breathing enough smoke as was, just like, doing our job. Just a really rough crowd. It's really hard work. That's definitely like physically my hardest job that I've ever done. But I know they were just good people.
Hard workers.
Hardworking people So I feel like in a lot of ways, those two guys, it's Ferg, he's from Alabama, he's a hot shot in Northern California right now. How that job works is you're gone for 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks. Sometimes you get an extension to 21 days. And then you're back for 3 days. You get 3 days off, and then you are made available again to another run. And so it's like an as needed kind of thing. But generally, once they get into like heavy fire season, they're there for 2 weeks, they're back for 3 days, and then they're out for another 2 weeks. And it's just a constant cycle that goes on for about 6 months.
You've made all these connections with people, but what about that look upward for you now? I know we talked the past again. So you said church maybe not your thing, but it still feels to me like you feel this need to draw upward to something greater than yourself. Do you?
Yeah. I don't do church. I said that earlier.
Right.
I am not anti-church. It's one of those things that, like, as I've dated different girls and I guess, like, kind of been looking for like a partner in life, I guess. One of the deal breakers for me is whether they can go to church with my parents or not, or whether they're comfortable doing
Does that matter?
That does matter to me. I think a lot of it it's the way that I was raised. And whether it's something that I super am into today or not, it's the way that I was raised. It's part of who I am. It's part of what makes me who I am. And I spent 2 years teaching people about it. And I do feel like there's so much good in it. I think what it came down to, like why I ultimately ended up leaving church, and it's not, I don't know, I say like I'm out of it, but it's not that I would be like, I'm never going to go back either. It's not how I would look at it by any means.
Why does it matter to you that you have that connection?
Because it matters to my parents.
And why does that matter?
Because, I mean, without my parents, I wouldn't be alive, obviously. Like, that's like a no duh,
Sure.
and my parents were always so good to me and very supportive of me. And that's not to say I never got frustrated with them, because I definitely did. And I think a lot of that frustration, like, especially before, for whatever reason, once I left church, I feel like my relationship with my parents got better. And I think it just came down to me being honest and like authentic in who I am and where I was, or where I am, I guess. And I've never been like, oh yeah, like I'm never ever going to go back. And my older brother, Seth, because I've had this conversation with literally all of my siblings. First I had it with my brother that's on a mission right now in Ecuador. And it was because right as he was starting to leave is when I left church. And I don't know, when he went through the temple and stuff, I wasn't in a place where I could do that. And I felt like I needed to talk to him and, let him know why. Anyways, so had that conversation with him. Everyone has been very understanding, I guess is the best way to put it. And Seth
But for you, it was that you should be honest about it.
Yeah.
And just be real. This is where I am. Church isn't the thing I value as much as, because you said it's this love for your parents is what I just heard you say that actually matters. Is it the family relationship?
That matters. Family matters a lot to me. And I haven't always lived like it did. Like when I had my year where I went and did a bunch of different things, like I had a year where I lived in 6 states in 12 months. During that year, I did not prioritize family. And
did you miss it?
At the time, maybe not. But looking back on it, I think that was really stupid. Like I look back at myself and I was like there was never a job or a situation or like, I don't know, like a place that was more important than your family. And for me, I don't feel super close with the majority of our extended family. To be totally honest, I feel like there's still not much of a connection with a lot of the aunts and uncles. There's a couple because I'm a big skier that I feel like I've connected with them because of skiing.
Right.
Like Brian would be very much in that. Mike, I guess to a degree. Valuing like my immediate family especially is just, I don't know. I remember they went to California for like a family reunion because at this point, Mama Joy has her kids that are all grown up.
Right.
And we're all out doing our own thing. And most of them live within a 2-hour radius, except for their one kid named Kai, who just can't stay in the same place. And she always, and I actually love this, and I like will support this forever. She always wants to get everyone together for at least a weekend, usually in like February or March. It's a big deal for her. And that year when I was out and about and doing whatever I did, I didn't go to that. And I could have. Like, honestly, I could have. I could have, told my work and be like, hey, guys, like, I'm going to be gone for a week.
Yeah.
And if you have a problem with that, like, it's actually not that big of a deal. I'll be fine.
Sure.
You'll be fine. If you really have a problem with it, then I guess I won't come back, and that's how I approached it the second time that I went to Montana. And they gave me a little bit of grief, but at the end of the day, it was just like they knew that they didn't really have anything over me. They couldn't do anything to me. And at the end of the day, like, a job does not matter more than my fam. And being there, especially Mama Joy is cute. Like, we know 6 to 8 months in advance, like, when that's going to happen, what weekend that's going to happen, and where we're going to be. Like, this year, it's going to be President's Day weekend, and we're going to be in Eden, which is just outside of Ogden, Utah. And I've known that for probably 3 months at this point. That's why she does it, so that everyone can show up.
Your parents really matter to you, and your siblings really matter to you. And
too.
Just being able to keep that strong connection with them. You're saying they value that relationship with God, like, but do you?
Yeah, in a different way. How I looked at it, especially when I was like initially not wanting to do church, which was probably 2 years before I really left church. What really brought it into question is when I was out fighting fire, and I was with a bunch of guys that none of them grew up really religious in any way. One of them was Catholic for a while, but he was atheist while we were out there fighting fire. And I remember like something that he told me that stuck with me. He went to Jerusalem at one point, and he went to the birthplace of Christ. And he told me this was like, right when he was in like the midst of like his big faith crisis. And he was like, hey, like, it was kind of an all or nothing thing for him, when he went there. And he's like, if I feel like there's something big, there's something really important, then like I'll take that seriously. And he went there, and how he felt, going to the birthplace of Christ, he just felt like, because that is a place that would be, sacred or special to a lot of different religions, all Christian religions, but a lot of different religions. And he felt like it was just a competition between religions of, this pissing contest essentially of who can show that they care more. And he was like, I don't believe in a God that feels that way. That you have to compete with somebody else. And I remember like he told me that, and that wasn't like this like, oh yeah, like I agree with that mentality to a degree. I don't feel like it should be a competition. How I connect, for me, like, it's in nature in a lot of ways. That's how I feel like a connection to God or to a higher power. And for a lot of other people, that could be different. That could be going to church, or that could be going to the temple, or that could be whatever. And for me, it wasn't like whenever I would feel like the most at peace and the most, I guess, connected was when I was like out in nature, which isn't going to church necessarily. Like I can still go to church. I don't have any problem going to church, but that wasn't what was the most important to me. The most important thing to me was to be able to have time to be outside, essentially. And I still definitely feel that way. I feel like that's a lot more important to me. It's a lot important to me within a week to be able to spend time outside, preferably every day, than to go to church for 2 hours less a day. So I talked to my buddy, and he told me that's how he felt about stuff. And he said that he was atheist. I wouldn't say that he was atheist. I would say he was more like he just didn't believe in religion. Like, religion was not it for him. But I think that he's
religion.
Yes, an organized religion. I think he definitely had this like, sense of like an upper power, or, God in whatever way that it looks like for him. But I think it kind of opened my eyes to this idea of like, it doesn't have to be exactly this way for everybody ever. It comes down to figuring out what works for you as an individual. And that's how I still feel about it. And I know that for my parents, what works for them is going to church and going to the temple. And for me, it's like, I guess I look at it in a lot of ways, and like, I could take it or leave it, because it doesn't make a difference for me as much. Like, if I went to church on Sunday versus doing really anything else. But for my parents, it does. And so I feel like, because I love my parents, I owe it to them to like respect that. And if I'm going to be at home on Sunday, then I just think that it's appropriate for me to go to church with them. And I'm more than happy to. I don't have any problem with it. But I don't necessarily go for me. I go because it's important for them.
Right.
And
you love them.
Yeah. It's because I go because I care. but I don't go. I think another thing that I really struggle with, and this is a lot of religions, is this idea that if you don't do the right thing, then you're going to be condemned for it, or that you're going to go to hell for it.
I'm not good enough.
Oh yeah,
I'm
it just
just
turns
not
it turns
good
into this
enough.
like infinite guilt trip of like I'm
Yeah.
not good enough, and I hate that. I hate that because I mean I definitely struggled with that idea of like I'm not good enough. You know, that was me in Guatemala to a T.
Right.
Like I struggled with this idea of I'm not good enough. And I guess I didn't super finish like how I got over that. Steve told me to read the Book of Mormon, so I did. And when I got done reading it, this is something I don't really study scriptures by any means now,
Sure.
but it's what got me through Guatemala was I read the Book of Mormon and it's like it just made it so I was okay.
Yeah.
And I don't remember having like this super moment necessarily while I was reading it or this like specific like scripture even where I was like, oh yeah, like this like really spoke to me and changed everything. It was just, you know, I did that and then that act, like however it worked out, it's like for whatever reason I was okay after that. And I felt like, you know, all of a sudden I was good enough and really anything had changed about me.
Hmm.
At least not initially. Like I feel like over more time, like I was really happy. I actually directly after that period of being so low and so down in the dumps in Guatemala, I was followed immediately by like one of my happiest times in my entire life. And that has it, which was, I had about 8 months on my mission instead of 4 when I initially wanted to go home. But, you know, there's a 3-month period that was really hard. And it was while I was in that area that it talks about where, you know, we found the people that had been killed and, you know, like not good things were happening where I was at still. Really poor area, hot. It wasn't very easy to find people to teach.
Sure.
It was a hard area in a lot of ways. And I was like just so happy there. And I honestly don't have any idea why. Like maybe it was because it was mango season and so I was like eating mangoes for like my heart's desire. But I kind of doubt it. You know, like it was just like there was for whatever reason, like and I haven't necessarily been on that much of a high since. And it's not that like I'm not trying to say like woe is me, like life isn't good anymore or anything like that. Like life is awesome. But for whatever reason, like immediately following that, like such an intense low, maybe it was just the contrast that made it feel like it was such a high
Peace.
after. I found peace and I was comfortable with who I was. I was so comfortable in my own skin. And that was probably the first way that I really felt comfortable in my own skin and who I was in my entire life.
Do you know this tumor? I mean, it makes me think a lot at 2 o'clock in the morning when I can't sleep. And I tell you, there's something to what you just said that resonates with me where, you know, I've had a lot of, you know, I've been thinking a lot. I mean, my next phase of my journey is probably dying, right? And I thought that's kind of a wake up call a little bit. Like, am I comfortable with who I am? I've had to have those inner conversations in my mind. And there's something to what you said, I think, just about accepting and maybe realizing this is who I am. This is where I'm at. And in my case, I mean, I've had a lot of thinking of this is where I want to be and who I want to be with, right? There's something to what you said that I think family is a big part for all of us. We are all drawn to it, right? We all want that in some way in our life. And I think it's funny. In my case, I mean, those that don't know my stories, I've been single my whole life. I've never gotten to have like my own, to make my own family. So I've had to figure out what is family for me, right? For me, it was actually finally accepting, you know, this has not come to me. This is not one of these things where I've been able to progress and grow, right? And have that happen. But what I found is I can bloom where I've been planted. And what I found is my joy has come as I finally said, I can be a really good daughter. I can be a really good aunt. I can be a really good sister in these different roles that I am. It's not what the stuff I hope for, I wish I would have had because it hasn't come. And so for me, I think it's just been figuring out that, hey, I'm going to meet God one of these days and that I am okay. This is what I did with what I was given. And, this is my story. And it has to be like that this is who I am. And is that good enough?
Like that.
Yeah. And just being comfortable. I love what you said, just being comfortable with this is who I am right now. And now to your point, I think we all would love to be our very best, right? And I think that sometimes is where that inner voice, we have to kind of figure that out for ourselves, don't we? And find peace with it. And for me, I think that's the thing where I say it's super fun to just hear from me how people, what's your journey? What's your journey of looking up? What's your journey of looking out toward others? And I love it, Kai. Other thoughts? Because we've got to get this kid on the plane here eventually.
Oh yeah,
He's got to get.
I'm not
have to get
I'm
some
not
homework
worried about
done.
that. I'm not worried about that. Yeah, all of that can get figured out too. I don't know. I guess the only other thing, like speaking to I guess church and the look up part of everything. I remember when because I had a conversation with all of my siblings, this is where I'm at with church and things.
Yeah.
A lot of it was just to clear the air, just so they knew.
You weren't surprised.
It wasn't. Yeah, well, it wasn't a question mark, because I feel like it had been a question mark for people for probably years at that point. I remember Seth, my oldest brother, who has kids. He's the only brother with kids right now. Not for very long.
Not for very long.
Yeah, but as of today, he's the only brother who has kids. And I remember he looked at me and he was like, yeah, you can think that way right now. And I bet when you have kids, it's going to change. And I remember looking at him and I was like, probably right.
Huh.
But I guess at the end of the day, I know what works for me and what's important to me, and that can fit into a lot of different situations, I guess. And where I'm not incredibly uncomfortable, I guess at the end of the day too, it's it takes, to have kids, you have to have two people. And so if, the odds of things being the exact same for both people involved is that hey, we see exactly eye to eye of for me, it's going to church doesn't necessarily matter as much. I don't feel like a fulfillment or as much from that as I do from other things. The odds of meeting somebody where it's they meet everything else that's important to me and also agreeing on that, I don't feel is incredibly high, and I'm okay with that. And I feel at the end of the day, it just turns into are you willing to go and support the other person and the things that matter for them? Because I feel for, to have a good environment to raise kids, you have to have parents that are, maybe it's not that you're 100% on the same level with how you care about things, but I think it's important to support how the other person feels about things. So for me, it's it's important that I get to spend time in the outdoors with my kids. Sure. And I feel most people are they're pretty okay working with that. For whoever else, I guess what specifically comes to mind for me is Michelle, she would want to do church.
Right.
And we've had that conversation and I know that. And I don't have any problem supporting you with that. And if that, if that turns into me being hey, we're going to go to church and, in this hypothetical, again, we have not been dating very long, so it's probably absurd that I'm saying this, but in this hypothetical, whoever I would marry, if they did feel that way, then if that turns into we're going to get our kids up on Sunday morning and we're going to take them to church, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But.
Well, one of these days he's going to be a dad, like you said, and he's going to be amazing at it. And if anyhow, this is Kai. So just know, I think as we close this, again, first podcast ever.
Yeah.
For both of us.
It wasn't.
And,
yeah.
Anyway, it has been a delight, Kai, to have you here this week. And I love open, just good conversation. So you have lifted me. If you ever get lucky and get to have him in your ear, I think you're going to be blessed to have Kai in your life. So I hope that doesn't happen often for anyone. Yeah. Anyway, Kai, sure love you. Yep. And good luck with all you're doing there. You're going to do some good in the world.
Thanks.
And then, get ready. Here we go. Buckle up, Buttercup. Here we go.
There we go.
Yeah, I think there's good times ahead. There's going to be some amazing times ahead. So for you and for me. So
There will be.
sure love you.